Sick and tired of your love-hate relationship with wine?
Welcome to the Feel It Alcohol-Free podcast. Hi, I'm Coach Ruby Williams.
And I'm Coach Susan Larkin.
We're two former wine lovers turned alcohol freedom coaches, exposing the lies about alcohol.
And giving you, our listeners, the tools to break free so you can feel lit.
And when you're lit, you'll feel healthier, freer, and more in control of your life.
So relax, kick back, and get ready to feel lit alcohol-free. Hey, welcome back to the Feel It Alcohol-Free podcast. Ruby and I are so excited to be here with you, and we have a very special guest today. We want to welcome Chris Cardone to the podcast. Yay, Chris. So I have a fun story about how I came to know Chris. My daughter, who's always sending me menus that have non-alcoholic options, and she happens to live in New York City. So she was doing dry January, and she was at the restaurant that Chris was bartending at, and she had one of his amazing non-alcoholic cocktails and started talking to him about it. And then she said, "You got to meet my mom. She has a podcast and she's alcohol free too." And so I just contacted Chris. I'm like, yes, this is so awesome. Like, she was literally texting me while she was at the restaurant, I think. And she sends me things all the time, but she said that your non-alcoholic cocktail was amazing. And she was able to have an amazing dry January, having all these non-alcoholic drinks in many, many restaurants in New York. And I've noticed when I go to visit her, she'll always pick a restaurant that she knows has a non-alcoholic menu. And that's changed because I became alcohol-free in 2020. Then it was slim pickings. So it's amazing how the industry's changed. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today. So welcome, Chris.
Hi, Chris.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. I feel like I already have a million things to talk about.
Oh, good.
That intro.
Well, I'm going to just read your bio and then we'll dive into your story. So we'll introduce you a little bit to Chris. In 2015, Chris made the life-changing decision to take a break from alcohol, recognizing that his drinking habits, deeply ingrained from years in the industry, were negatively impacting his life. And what started as a temporary break turned into a permanent choice when he realized that sobriety allowed him to become a better father, coworker, friend, and person. Ruby and I both agree with that. However, he quickly noticed the lack of non-alcoholic options in bars and the stigma against sober bartenders. And many of his colleagues questioned whether he could still succeed in the industry. But Chris saw an opportunity to redefine what hospitality means, ensuring that everyone has a seat at the bar, whether they choose to drink or not. And so through his company, Continuous Beverage Solutions, Chris advocates for inclusivity in cocktail culture, working with bars and brands to develop non-alcoholic and low ABV options that are just as compelling as their alcoholic counterparts. And he believes that everyone's relationship with alcohol is unique, and the industry must evolve to offer welcoming, judgment-free environments where people can make their own choices, which we totally agree with. And Chris was named Bartender of the Year in 2017 after winning the Diageo World Class Bartending U.S. competition, the world's largest global mixology competition. So that would have been when you were sober, right? In 2017. Here you won the Best Bartender Award. That's amazing. Yeah. So welcome, and tell us a little bit about your journey to deciding to embrace sobriety.
Yeah. So I started tending bar in 2000, and at the time it felt like it was just going to be a part-time thing, and it didn't take very long to realize it was sort of my calling, right? I think there are some of us who are lucky enough to have a moment of clarity early on and realize that they were sort of put on this earth to do something. And I quickly realized that being in the hospitality industry in some shape or form is kind of what I was put on this earth to do. And that has looked differently. So when I started working in the industry, there was no such thing as cocktails. There were, terrible drinks from the 90s and the 80s that were still relevant, but there was no cocktail. Cocktail culture didn't exist. So flair bartending did. And so I started doing that, where I would travel around the country and sometimes out of the country, and I would compete in flair bartending competitions. So if you ever seen the movie Cocktail, it's like that, flipping bottles around stuff.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. How fun. Okay.
So that was an opportunity to travel and see the world, because I grew up in New York and I didn't do a lot of traveling. My parents weren't big travelers. And so I got an opportunity to see the world and see the cultures and kind of have an eye-opening experience. But with that experience, also, when you start bartending, there's a culture of alcohol and alcoholism that comes kind of very quickly to your doorstep. And you sort of take on a role of the party person, right? Like back when I started, there were no such thing as a sober bartender. That didn't exist. And if you were sober, if you didn't drink, it was probably kept very quiet. You weren't public about this or anything. And so most people took on a role of, who's the bartender? The bartender is the guy or girl who can outdrink everyone in the room, who can outlast everyone in the room, who is the biggest partier in the room. And you take that persona on and it becomes who you are. So in the 2000 and let's say late 2000s, early 2010s, the writing kind of was on the wall that flair bartending was falling out of popularity and the cocktail movement was exploding everywhere. There were speakeasies popping up everywhere. Everyone started doing cocktail menus, and that was all the rage. So I pivoted into that, and I decided that was going to be my next sort of portion of the industry career that I chose. And so with cocktails, you're talking about more alcoholic drinks. And what I mean by that is, when you go to a bar and you have a beer or you have a rum and coke, the proof on that, or the amount of alcohol that you're ingesting, is lower than if you order a martini, a Manhattan, an old fashioned, or any of the classic cocktails. Classic cocktails have a lot of alcohol in them, and they tend to be very strong. So again, you sort of take on this heavier drinker and you start to pick up more and more of those, we'll call them bad habits, when it comes to alcohol and drinking and partying and things like that. The other problem is, with the cocktail explosion, there was an event to go to every night, a new bar to check out every night. And so you sort of get, I like the expression that you get sort of caught up in a whirlwind. And I've been using that for years to describe my sobriety moment, was that when you're in a whirlwind, it's really hard to get out. And so every week was the same. It was drink, wake up, say, I'm not drinking tonight. By the end of the night, drink, wake up, say, I'm not drinking tonight. And it was just the whirlwind, and you get caught and sucked into that, and you can't, it's hard to get out. And so I would trick myself every year for about maybe 4 or 5 years. I was cognizant that I was drinking really heavy and that this probably wasn't sustainable over the long term. So every year I would sort of play a mind game with myself. And what I would do is I would not drink during December. And my trick was, if I can go 31 days during the time when most people drink their heaviest, I'm okay. I don't have a drinking problem. And so that was the trick I played on myself for a long time. And there would be multiple times throughout the year where I'd wake up and I say, what am I doing? I can't do this anymore. I need to cut back. But it was always just talk. So the other note of interest is that throughout all the years I drank, there was about 4 different circumstances where I would have hallucinogenic blackout episodes where I would be on another plane. Reality was gone. And there was never any consistency with why they happened. It was over the course of multiple years. There were different circumstances. There was different alcohol involved. And the only consistent thing with all of these blackouts, these hallucinogenic moments, were that I would have some sort of apocalyptic nature to them. Someone was coming to kill me and everyone else around me. And I would be in these sort of panic modes where I would tell people, we need to get out of here. We need to run away. We need to do this. So the final straw was in 2015 on Memorial Day weekend. I was out with a coworker and my manager of a bar that I was sort of moonlighting at. I was doing like a weekend job out on the east end of Long Island. And I was working a double that day, and the 3 of us went out to a bar afterwards, and we had 2 drinks. So background on Chris is, back in 2015, 2 drinks was like an appetizer, right? This was not my night out. And so after 2 drinks, we went back to her house. My boss was letting me stay in her basement, like subletting her basement for me for the weekends. And we said goodnight. She went upstairs. I went downstairs. I came back upstairs a few minutes later, and she said I was as white as my shirt right now. and telling her that we had to get out, that there were zombies coming to kill us. And, her immediate reaction was, dude, go to sleep. You're drunk or whatever. And then she realized I wasn't going anywhere. And she didn't know how to handle the situation because I wasn't being violent. I wasn't threatening her. I was just genuinely concerned that we were in trouble. And so she called the police and she said, listen, I don't know what to do with this guy. I don't know him very well. He's been working for me for 2 weekends. I'm not in danger, but I don't know what to do. So they came and I told them they needed to get out of there because the zombies were going to kill them too. And they finally sent me home. They put me on a train, public transportation, sent me back to my house on Long Island. And I woke up the next day having no recollection of any of this. And I texted her and I said, what happened? And why am I home? Why am I in my house? And she said, you really don't know? And I said, no, I really don't know. My phone rang. It was her. And she explained the situation. She asked me what drugs I was taking. And I told her I don't do drugs. Drugs was never a thing for me. It was always alcohol. And she didn't believe it, of course. And so she said, I don't really feel comfortable with you working with us anymore. And that was the first time that I ever had an alcoholic event that was work related that was negative. I never really drank at work. It was always after work. It was always in some other form of function. It was never a work problem. It was never a work thing for me. And so it really freaked me out. It was like sort of like my rock bottom, right? Everyone has their story.
Scary. Yeah.
So I texted a friend of mine and I said, I had this really weird moment again. I don't know what to do. I'm going to take a year off from drinking. And he texted back and said, I don't think you can do that. And what bothered me was that I actually agreed with him. Deep down, I kind of said, I don't know if I can do this either. So I said, all right, now I'm really doing it. Now I really want to get to a year. So I did. And about 9 months in, one of the servers I was working at the restaurant in New York that I was working at was also, he was a sober server. I haven't talked to him in years, but he came up to me in the middle of service one day and I was making drinks on the service bar and he walked over and he said, can I ask you a question? And I said, yeah, of course. What's up? And he said, what do you do in another couple months when your year's up? Are you going to go back to being, madman drinker Chris? And without hesitating at all, I just came out of my mouth. I said, no, I'm never drinking again. Wow. And it kind of was one of those things where after it came out, I was like, wait, what did I just say? Like trying to grab the words out of the air and stuff them back in my mouth. But yeah, it was like such a moment where it just hit me and I was like, yeah, I'm not drinking anymore. And then over the course of a little while, it became clear to me that every aspect of my life, like you had said in my intro, was improving, right? I was better in every aspect. And so obviously there were other challenges that we can get into as we talk, but that was sort of my moment where I said, this is it. I'm going to be sober for the rest of my life.
Wow, that's an amazing story. And it just talks about what alcohol does to our brain, that it can cause people hallucinations, right? Even 2 drinks at that point because of probably how it had affected your brain over the years of drinking, right? And that's what happens with blackouts. Once you have a blackout, you're going to continue having them. And we think it's not affecting our body and brain, but it is, Yeah,
wow. It's also interesting because I was listening to one of your other episodes and you were talking about happiness and how we equate happiness and alcohol. It's also interesting how often we will make excuses for alcohol too. So I was finding every single excuse under the book of why I was hallucinating besides alcohol, right? I was dehydrated. I didn't sleep enough. I did this. I did that. It couldn't possibly be the one consistent there that alcohol was always involved. Couldn't be that.
Right. Oh yeah. That is so true.
I really relate to that. Like, or I did with aging. I can't remember things and I'm sleeping bad and I'm getting more wrinkle. It's gotta be my aging or menopause for women, but wait a minute. Is it the alcohol?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so I'm really curious about the stigma that you encountered against sober bartenders.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Well, like I said, there was no such thing as a sober bartender. And at the time when I decided I wasn't going to drink, I could probably count on one hand. And the hospitality industry is gigantic. Obviously, it's a global industry, but it's also this big. And everyone tends to know everyone. And I could probably count on one hand the amount of bartenders that I knew who were in this industry for the long term that were sober. And everyone else was drinking. And so when I decided to make this move, I first had to overcome my fear of being a fraud. Because
yes,
when you think about it, your job as a bartender is to serve people alcoholic drinks. So are you completely sort of a hypocrite by serving people alcohol if you don't drink? That was my first sort of thing I had to internally deal with. And what I decided was one has absolutely nothing to do with the other one. The second thing I was worried about was, can I be around all of this alcohol and be sober? Is that going to affect me making that decision? That was a relatively easy one for me because, as I said earlier, I was never a drinker at work. That was never my thing. So I was very easy to compartmentalize. This is work. This is social. Social gets me in trouble. Work never has. So that was an easy one for me because it's what I do. It's what I love to do. And I have such a passion for it. I wasn't willing to let alcohol get in the way of ruining that for me. It had to make a very conscious choice. And I said to myself, and I try to be very conscious of the fact that I'm lucky and that I'm able to compartmentalize, because not everybody can, right? This is never a one size fits all situation for everyone. Like everyone has a different relationship with alcohol and drugs. So for me, I was able to say, even though it's in my hand and I'm pouring in a glass, I don't feel the need to drink it myself. That was never... It was just a separation. The big one that I had was that the people in the industry that I worked with were filling me with doubt of whether or not I could continue to do this in a career way. And I vividly remember having arguments on social media with people who were brand ambassadors or longtime bartenders, literally saying to me, you can't be a bartender and not drink because you don't understand spirits, you won't understand the cocktails you're making, you won't understand flavor. And me pushing back on them saying one has nothing to do with the other one. Now, I do still taste and spit my cocktails. Don't get me wrong, I'm not tasting, 55 cocktails in a night. But if I'm designing one, I may put a cocktail or 2 or 3 versions in my mouth, spit it out. And for me, that never has any kind of triggering effect. Again, I know bartenders who cannot do that, and they have other people sort of do it for them. I look at when I'm creating a drink, I look at that as a scientific work-related thing. And to be completely honest, over the past 9 years, I've developed such a distaste for it that I don't even enjoy it. It's so work-related now that I'm like, I can't wait to be done with this. I don't want to be doing this. I don't want to be tasting this. This doesn't taste enjoyable to me, which is kind of, I guess, really helpful. I joke around and say it's kind of like that joke if the best form of birth control is babysitting. It's kind of the same thing.
Right.
I'm tasting drinks that aren't great, and I'm spitting them out going, oh. So it's kind of like helps me kind of almost wrap my head around the idea of not wanting to drink. But that was a big push, and trying to get over that hump was really hard at first because it was constant self-doubt and understanding of whether or not this could be a career choice. And then to pivot into the part you brought up, 2017 winning World Class was a major sort of aha moment for me, because to be a sober bartender and win the biggest bartending competition in the country in the United States was one of those moments of saying like, sort of thing where it was, thank you. It was sort of saying like anyone who doubted it was wrong, because being able to understand flavor, aroma, mouthfeel, all of the stuff that comes with a good drink has nothing to do with whether or not you drink it. And so that was a big deal for me, getting over that hump.
I love that. That is so amazing. Yeah, that's so great. You showed them all. And then that kind of thing, though, the mouth feel, the aroma, that's the stuff that's kind of has been in the past missing in non-alcoholic crafted cocktails. You were lucky if you got, I don't know, Shirley Temple, or I don't know. I've had some pretty bad ones and some really great ones. And actually the best non-alcoholic drink I've had was from a sober bartender. I didn't know it at the time. She made me this lemon drop martini with a sugared rim, and I was at a bridal shower and everyone else was having the espresso martinis, and I was just standing there going, I want a martini glass. I want one like everybody else. So I asked for that. I said, I don't drink. Could you make me? And she goes, oh yeah. And she made me this amazing drink. And then when I went to the ladies' room, I walked by the bar and I said, oh my God, that was the best drink ever. And she goes, I'm sober. And it was such a great moment, like she was just like my gal, like my wingman, making me a great drink so that I could feel included.
We have so much to unpack right now. Oh my God. So you're 100% right. When I decided to stop drinking, my choices were to either put my hands in my pockets and stand around and have everyone, single person in the room being like, why aren't you drinking? What's wrong with you? Or the other choice was to drink a tonic water, which was then served in a pint glass. And it's basically like having a red sign over your head blinking that says not drinking tonight, not drinking tonight. So the options back then were very lacking. Even as you said, in 2020, there still weren't there really. There was a few floating around, but it wasn't like it is now. And the change over the past 5 years, we'll say since 2020, has been remarkably exciting. The second part of that is that I think that whenever you do anything, doesn't have to be literally anything. If you start with why, if you understand the reason and you have an emotional connection to why you're doing something, you're going to do it better. So I could totally understand and attest to why someone who's sober, who understands what you are personally going through in that moment, will go out of their way to craft you something like that. That totally, makes sense to me. Another part of what you said was the fact that she had to whisper to you, I'm sober, which I'm glad we're getting away from that nonsense too. And you could just have a normal conversation and say, yeah, I don't drink either. And say, oh, really? That's cool. And it's not one of those feelings like I have to whisper it to you and this has to be a secret between us. That sort of stigma is again falling away, which is great. Another part of it is that you said the word included, which to me is the key of why we need non-alcs in restaurants, in bars, is that there's a weird public misconception that people don't drink because they're trying to save money. And that's not why people order non-alcs. It's not like I go into a bar and I say, I really don't want to pay the $18 for that cocktail, so I'll get the $9 non-alcoholic cocktail because I'm trying to watch that extra $9. That has nothing to do with it. It's about wanting to order something that will make me feel included with the group so that I'm not spotlighted as someone who's weird or special. It's also a matter of it gives me the opportunity to cheers with people, and that it also gives me the opportunity to have something that will enhance my meal. Because that's why not everybody, but most people drink wine, is when they're having their food, the wine enhances their food. So if I'm able to have a cocktail, a non-alcoholic wine, a non-alcoholic beer, whatever it may be, and it gives me the opportunity to enhance my meal with either comparing and contrasting flavors, whatever the science on that is for that particular moment, it gives me that opportunity still. So for someone like the three of us, we're not trying to budget by not ordering a cocktail. It's about having something that is just as good, and that's the key, as the other cocktails that are being served or the other beer that's being served. And as long as it meets that standard of intention and balance and flavor, I'm happy to pay the same amount of money for that non-alc as the alcohol cocktail. But again, it gives me that feeling of inclusivity, which is what you brought up.
Yeah. And I know people do complain about that. How come it's so much more? It's the same price when there's no alcohol in it. But there's other ingredients in it. All those ingredients and the non-alcoholic spirits, it's the same thing. Like, I'm happy to pay the same amount. Absolutely. And usually then I don't have three though. I have one. So I'm still saving money, right? Because when I would drink wine, I'd be like, 3 glasses of $18 wine versus one glass.
Susan.
One. Yeah. So tell us about how your company, Continuous Beverage Solutions, evolved and what it offers and what your vision is for the hospitality industry.
So when I won World Class, I had the same sort of moment that a lot of vegans have when they figure it out, which is to scream from the rooftops that they figured out the secret to life. And everybody should be a vegan, right? Oh my God, you should be a vegan too. It's sort of the same thing when you find a level of comfort with sobriety. You want to scream it from the roofs. You want to tell everyone about how everything's better. You should do this too. And surprisingly, most people hate that. People don't like to be told what to do, especially when you're happy. So I made the mistake that a lot of people do. And I was very public about my sobriety. And I was talking to the industry about how, seeing what I've seen over the past 17 years, that we could do this very differently, that we don't have to all be like this, that this doesn't have to be the way the alcohol industry and the hospitality industry is. And I got a lot of pushback from it. A lot of people that I were friends with, that I looked up as mentors, sent me texts and emails and messages saying, zip it, to get off your soapbox, get off your high horse. We don't need to hear it. Whatever you do is your business, but And so I did. I got really insecure about it and said to myself, maybe I'm wrong here. Maybe I shouldn't be doing this. Maybe I'm making people feel badly. And so I did. I zipped it up. And over the course of 6 years, I was getting a lot of private messages from people on social media saying, hey, listen, like I'm a bartender in this state, in this city, and I'm really struggling. I don't know what to do. I'm either drinking too much, or I don't want to drink as much, or I don't want to drink at all, or whatever the situation is. Can you help me? And I would sort of give them, like, I don't want to call it a coach because that's a little bit more, that's a little bit more involved than a random text here and there, but just kind of helping people understand where they are and where they need to be, and kind of sort of giving them what I did as a guide. Mm-hmm. And I did that. It helped me too. I think that whenever you can sort of teach, it helps you learn a little bit about yourself and reinforces your reasons and your thinking and things like that. And so I just kind of kept it very quiet and very private. But in 2023, I had a moment where I was at a sober event, and I looked around and I said, you know what? This is a different world that I'm living in than 6 years ago. And I want to try again. I want to sort of take an opportunity, and it had nothing to do with finance. I get this comment a lot from people where they're like, oh man, great timing. And I'm like, yeah, maybe. But at the same time, that was not the intention. The intention was to literally give what I tried to do back in 2017 another shot, and sort of ride the momentum, if you will, of this sort of new world that we live in when it comes to sobriety and not drinking as much, and the opportunity to make really good cocktails. So to answer your question, when I launched, I said to myself, I want to kind of do two prongs. One, I want to do restaurant consulting. Now, don't get me wrong. I can come into a restaurant. I can help them with their alcoholic menu just as well as a non-alc. I can walk in and help them with their restaurant flow and teach them about table turns and maximizing efficiency and working on hospitality and sales and all of that stuff. But where my niche comes in, that I think I differentiate from myself from the majority of people, is that my why, my focus is on the non-alc portion. And this is a really interesting time for us because we're falling into a moment where most bars have not caught up to what's happening, and they're losing a lot of money because of it. Mm-hmm. So if the three of us walk into a restaurant and we sit down and there's no option for us to drink, we're going to order 3 waters. And as you just said, that $18 glass of wine times 3, you're looking at $54, right? Now, if you look at 3 rounds of that, like you just said, that's $160. So that's $160 loss that restaurant just occurred. And if there's 10 tables and 3 of them are not drinking, it adds up really fast over the course of a night, times a week, times a month, times a year. There's a lot of, it's thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars that people are losing out on, especially depending on the space, right? So if you look at things on like a grand level and you look at like a resort that is in the middle of the Caribbean and they don't have a non-alcoholic portion of their menu that people can have for whatever reason, whether they're pregnant, don't drink, or anything else, now you're getting into the millions of dollars throughout the year. So to be able to come in and teach people how to use non-alcoholic spirits, which, again, as you said, they weren't really available 5 years ago. There was a few, like Seedlip had just sort of hit the American market, but there were very few. Now there's an abundance. Now with abundance comes crap too.
Quality. Issues.
So there you have to differentiate. And again, that's where experts come in. That's where bartenders who did the same thing, and I'm going to get a little hokey-tokey in a second about that, but did the same thing back when the cocktail world exploded and sort of were the gatekeepers and the drivers of good product and good cocktails and what they should smell like and look like and taste like. It's the same thing now, where you have to have somebody come in who's an expert in non-alc, because it's not just a simple plug and play situation where you say, I'll take the gin out and I'll put this non-alcoholic product in there. The flavors and the mouthfeel of them change. So you have to figure out ways to manipulate that, to bring on mouthfeel, you need to add sugar to your non-alcs because non-alcs generally don't have sugar in them. So there's a bunch of things you have to do to manipulate that same kind of feel as an alcoholic cocktail. And when you can do that, and when you can make a cocktail that smells the same, looks the same, tastes the same, feels the same, gives you the same length, gives you the same experience and elevates your experience, again, people are happy to spend that money on them. And so now you're talking about a true ROI. The other part of this, which again gets a little geeky in the hospitality industry, is that the majority of people in the hospitality industry are not career people. They're not lifers like myself. They're doing this as a transient, sort of figuring it out or doing something to help pay their bills for something else that they want to do, that they have something else in mind. And those people, generally speaking, are motivated by money. And so if the three of us come in and sit down and say, we're not drinking tonight, you're not getting the same level of service as the table that orders the $700 bottle of wine. You're just not. And so if you can get people drinking non-alcs, the servers are also giving better service because they see it as your check average is higher. You're going to make more money. So there is an intrinsic value for everyone across the board. And so it's sort of a win-win-win where you look at the people who are paying for the brick and mortar space are making more money. Servers are making more money on their tips. The guests are happier because they're getting a better environment. So everyone wins in this situation. And then real quick, the other portion of what I do is sort of creating experiential events with brand building in some way. Generally speaking, they are related around the health and wellness industry. So lots of gyms and run clubs and things like that, where people have options to have non-alc cocktails. Why would you run 10K around Central Park and then come back to the location and drink? Just It's counterintuitive. It doesn't make any sense. And so
I've always thought that,
that's one example. But like if you go to a gym and you work out and you have this great workout and then you go to a bar and you drink, it just doesn't add up. I get why people want to have a beer after a really like hard workout, or you're doing stuff outside and you're sweating all day and you just want something refreshing. But again, if the beer is just as good non-alcoholic, it just sort of makes sense, right? And so to give people options like myself, like you, who don't drink alcohol, that can still have that same experience after doing a health wellness kind of event, it just sort of makes sense. So that's the other portion of what I do.
That's great.
I'm having a really big moment here with you speaking because I live in the wine country and used to work in the wine industry. And kind of what you're saying is interesting. And Susan and I, when we finally met in person, we met at a winery where we could have an NA wine. But it's almost like what's been happening over the last 2 years is this like battle almost. And I think if we can convince, in some way, persuade the way you are, well, maybe people are choosing not to come to the wine industry or the wine country. If they're not drinking, they're going to find other things to do. But if you can include them, then it's a win-win. So I'm really, I'm going to use some of the, your language around how the wineries have inclusive wine tasting, because the properties are beautiful. The vineyards are gorgeous. It's a beautiful place to be, but it's all about alcohol.
All right. So two notes. One is the inclusivity thing is massively important. And you just brought up a great example of it. The 20-somethings that are driving the majority of this non-alcoholic push, right? The Gen Zs, the millennials who don't drink, they've never really gotten into it. And I'm kind of broadly speaking, but in general, that's what we're seeing. And so for them, they are similar to people with dietary restrictions when it comes to choosing where they go. And so that kind of group of that age group are so savvy now that they're actually going online and looking at a restaurant's menu or a bar's menu before they even go to decide whether they want to go or not. And I'm so personally invested in this, not only for myself, but also because my girlfriend has a dairy and a gluten allergy. So we do this all the time, especially when we travel. We will look up all the menus of places that we want to go until she says, I feel good about that one. That one gives me options. And they do the same thing with non-alcoholic cocktails. If you have a menu online and all it is alcohol, and then there's this like non-alcoholic options or like Coke, lemon,
O'Doul's,
they don't come. They go, no, we'll go somewhere else. So you're already losing your battle before they even walk in the door. And so you're bringing up the exact same situation just in a vineyard. If I don't drink, what does the vineyard offer me? Right? That's how people think about it. They don't see all of the other value. They don't see the experience, the beauty, the nature. They don't take all of that in. It's just, there's no option for me. I don't want to go. That's a big deal. The fact that people are making their decisions before they even walk out of their door is a massively important thing that a lot of people don't realize yet.
And we do that too. Like when your scenario of the three of us go into a restaurant, well, we wouldn't go to that restaurant if they didn't have options. So then they're missing out on our drink order. They're missing out on our food order, and there's a gal that I know who was wanting to celebrate her son's graduation, and she called this restaurant. They didn't have any non-alcoholic wine. She wanted to bring her own, and they said no. And afterwards, she called them and said, you know what? I probably would have dropped $3,000, maybe more, at this restaurant for a steak dinner for all the people I was bringing because it was a high-end restaurant. And I chose to go somewhere else because you would not let me bring my own non-alcoholic. And she was willing to pay the corkage fee and everything. I don't know why they would say no. But is that insane? And like you said, leaving money on the table, ridiculous. But yeah, Lauren always asks me where I want to go. We always check menus to make sure I have an option. And just like your girlfriend, right? We go for the person who has the special needs. But, that's how we pick restaurants now is do they have something for me to drink, I'm going to enjoy.
And that's what we talk about with our clients too. It's literally a tactic, look at the menu in advance, find something that you want to order that makes you feel special and included. And if it's not on the restaurant menus, they're probably going to choose someplace else, just like we've been saying.
In an industry that 1 out of 10 make it 10 years. And it's a nickel and dime industry when it comes to profit. Like a lot of people think, I'll open up a bar. That'll be so much fun. The bar business is extremely hard to make a profit on and extremely hard to stay relevant and keep having guests come back. So to shoot yourself in the foot before they even walk in the door, you're doing yourself a massive disservice for sure.
Yeah.
And then the way you treat them inside is also equally important. So I'll give you a really quick horror story. Not too long ago, I was doing an event and I went to a bar literally next door, a restaurant next door to the event I was working in New York. And I sat down at the bar and the bartender greeted us and said, "Can I get you something to drink?" And I said, "No, thank you." And he said, "Oh, okay." And my girlfriend had a glass of wine. And then we proceeded to eat our meal. Everything was fine. And then he came over for dessert and he said, "Would you like a little of our house-made grapefruit cello, like a limoncello, but made with grapefruit?" And I said, "No, thank you." And he said, "Are you sure?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm sure." And he said, "Oh, okay." And then he proceeded to pour it in the glass and put it in front of me and say, "I'll just leave it in case you change your mind."
That's like not trauma informed either. You know what I mean? It's like they need to be taught. Like, what if you were a person that couldn't resist it or something? Right. Oh my gosh, that's terrible.
And so these are the, there's other horror stories I certainly have. I was once berated by a bartender who poured everyone shots when we all walked in. And I said, "I don't drink." And I said, I picked up my water glass to cheers with them. And she berated me and told me that how dare I try to cheers their shots with my water.
Oh my gosh.
I've had multiple experiences over the years with things like that. And it just
getting better though. Yeah.
Oh,
overall.
Yeah. No, 100%. 100%.
But I have been treated badly by waiters when I didn't order. And I've gone in with like a little chip on my shoulder. Like if they treat me badly, I'm not going to tip them well. Like if they make me feel belittled, these were in the early days when I was less confident. But if I would always be nervous going into restaurants and, ordering and feel like, are they going to give me the stink eye because they know that the bill's going to be cheaper? Just like you said, it's going to be less because I'm not drinking. Or are they going to give me, bad service because
that's 100% a real thing.
I know. I've experienced it. It's so sad. No, I know.
Have you ever had somebody say, "Are you sure you don't want to just have one?"
Oh, yeah. I've ordered things off the menu. Like this one restaurant in New Haven, they have a temperance menu and they said, "Would you like a shot in that?" I'm like, "No, I'm ordering this drink on purpose because I don't want a shot in that." So yeah, it is kind of embarrassing.
And so when we talk about these things, I have a feeling I'm going to be real busy. So
you are.
There's a lot of growth to be had. And there's a lot of, I don't know if you've ever read the book by Will Guidara called Unreasonable Hospitality, but I think it's one of the better books in the hospitality industry. It's a really well-written, really informed book by Will. And it goes through his history with 11 Madison Park and kind of talks about taking a step up in your hospitality. And what's really cool about it is it's very transferable no matter what industry you are in. If you're an airline flight attendant, you can still take these things with you. If you work in, at a music festival, you can still take these things. So it's very transferable what he's talking about. But there's something that's sort of a gap, and that is how to deal with people who don't drink in the industry and make sure that they're getting the same level of experience, of attention, of that kind of stuff. And that's something that's not, we shouldn't expect people to know what they don't know. Right? Like that's wrong of us. It's wrong of society to say everyone should just know everything. Right? And so the job of great leaders is to lead and educate and teach. And so that's on the management team of that establishment or the ownership, whoever is communicating these messages downstream as far as employment goes. That's incumbent upon them to say, we all need to come in for a 30-minute meeting. And instead of talking about the new dish that comes out, we need to talk about hospitality for this kind of stuff. And so that kind of training is something that is lacking and needs to be addressed.
Yeah. Well, I am so glad that you are here and in this industry and with your vision and passion, because it's coming out so eloquently. And I'm so excited that things are changing and that more and more places that we will be going to, we will feel welcome and not shunned.
As I said before, I was going to get hokey-tokey about something, but I do believe that when it comes to restaurant experiences, that bartenders can change the world. I really do believe that. And the reason that I could say that with such certainty is that, again, I was around before jiggers, before fresh juice, before cocktail menus, and it was weird when it first happened. And so when you went into a bar that had a cocktail menu and the bartender was measuring with a jigger and they were using fresh juices and homemade syrups and homemade bitters, and they were using different products that you ever saw, it was weird. Now it's weird to not see a cocktail menu. I mean, you get a cocktail menu at Fridays, everyone has a cocktail menu and everyone uses measuring devices and everyone uses fresh juice. And when you go to a place that doesn't, it feels weird. It's the other direction. And so I truly believe that in 5-10 years from now, the three of us will talk about how it's weird if you don't go to a place who has a full non-alcoholic menu options. And that would be the standard, right? The standard is to have those sort of options, and those weird conversations and weird interactions aren't happening anymore. It's just, you don't drink. Okay, cool. What are you having? And it's just normal.
Yeah. And it's win-win. You make money. I get what I want. Everybody's happy.
And everybody gets included.
So this is the time in our podcast when we ask our guests to share what you do in your life to feel lit, alcohol-free.
I'm going to probably give you a little bit more of a 36,000 foot view than maybe some of the other people do. But I have these constant moments where I think about where I was and where I am now and the presence that I'm bringing to it. They're constant throughout my days. And it's really a really cool moment where I'm sort of present in the moment, thinking to myself, I'm actually going to remember this. Yeah. And I'm actually having fun doing this. And so I liken it to sports because there's, for some reason, I find that myself happening often where I take my kids to their first football game or a hockey game, or I take them somewhere. And I always think about when I used to go and I would drink and it would sort of just be a blur. And so again, the episode where you were talking about happiness really rang true to me, is that we always tend to think, oh my God, I had so much fun last night. I had so much fun at this thing. But you were drunk and you don't really remember any of it.
Right.
So you assume you had fun, but there's really no recollection. There's no memory. And so I find myself, even, like I said, doing random things. If I go for a hike, or if I'm at the beach, or if I'm on vacation, or whatever the situation may occur, where I find myself having these sort of present moments where I say to myself, I'm really enjoying myself. I'm actually really having fun. And tomorrow I'm going to remember this. And a year from now, I'm going to remember it clearly and concisely. So I know it's not really a specific answer, but at the same time, I feel like it's just so present in my days where I'll just have this step back moment being like, man, I'm so glad that I'm going to remember this. And that feels special.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. It's like gratitude, constant gratitude throughout your day of And
I think
life is so much better.
When you feel that, it justifies what you're doing, right? You're kind of getting these constant reminders of how much better things have gotten or are. And that feels like, okay, I'm doing the right thing here. I'm going to keep doing this.
Oh, I love that.
If you're struggling and listening to this, just know that Chris says it too. You just feel so much better alcohol free. This journey is so worth it. There's so much hope.
Yeah. We've talked about that on the podcast a lot, where we're like, we never meet anyone who stopped drinking who's like, it's okay. Like, no, they're always like, it's amazing. It's
hard. It's hard.
It is hard.
And I think that's important for anyone who's ever listening to something like this and they're trying to decide what they want to do, is that there are no one size fits all. And my story is not going to match up with your story, or the next person's story. And that everyone has to have their sort of moment of clarity, but that they shouldn't beat themselves up if it doesn't come as fast as they think. Because I can look back, I probably should have quit drinking in 2005. 10 years later is when I finally did it. But the amount of times I woke up regretting drinking or saying I need to do something about this, I need to make a change. It wasn't like in 2015, I just said, okay, first try, here we go. And it just happened. It's a progress thing. And it's about sort of figuring it out. But I would argue that my thing with sobriety is that everybody should probably take a moment at some point in their life and say, does my vision of how I want my relationship with alcohol to be, whether that's sobriety or a drink here and there, whatever they imagine a healthy version of their relationship with alcohol to be, does that match with what's actually happening? And if they're not meeting, that's when you need to say, I should re-examine. I should re-examine where I am and what I'm doing.
Yeah. And I think more and more people are doing that. So that's amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining us. This was such a great conversation on so many levels. It's going to be an amazing episode. And I thank you so very much. And I'm so glad my daughter met you.
The pleasure is all mine. I look forward to serving you a non-alcoholic cocktail one day.
I would love that. Thank you so much. All right. Thanks for joining us. And we will see you next week.
Thanks so much for listening to Feel Lit Alcohol Free Podcast. Do you have a question you'd like us to answer on the show?
All you need to do is head over to Apple Podcasts and do 2 simple things. Leave a rating and review telling us what you think of the show. And in that review, ask us any questions you have about breaking free from wine or living an alcohol-free lifestyle.
That's it. Then tune in to hear your question answered live.
And remember, do something today that will help you feel lit.
Don't forget to check out Feel It 21.
Your alcohol-free adventure awaits.